I wonder if everyone could take their seats, please. Thank you. Now that we have our distinguished clerk here, uh, Jamie, do we have you still there?
I'm here.
You're back? Okay. First of all, do we have a motion to come back into open session? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second? Second by several people. Second by Alderman Black. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll on the motion to come back into regular session?
Alderman Bray,
Yes.
Alderman Matthey,
Yes.
Alderman Sage, Alderman Malamoy, Alderman Burgess,
Yes.
Alderman Painter,
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Black, and Alderman Harmon.
Okay, well, we're back into regular session. And at this point, the first item is the MOU, the presentation and discussion on the memorandum of understanding with the Friends of the Bloomington Center for the Performing Arts, the BCPA, to establish, define, and coordinate a mutually beneficial relationship as requested by the Bloomington Center for the Performing Arts. And we start out with a presentation by Mr. Tetzloff and Ms. Tilton, and then we will have a council discussion for approximately 20 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jay, and then Vicki.
Sure. Thank you very much for this time tonight. I gave a copy of the presentation to everyone, so you can follow along as we go. First of all, I want to introduce our performing arts manager is here, Jim Mack. So I wanted to introduce him to all of you so you can see where we're going. He is the division chief, in essence. So more and more times you see the BCPA, more and more times you'll see Jim. But this is really, for him to take this division, the next step is this MOU. So that's why we're here. We have members of the Friends group here. We have members of staff here. I wanted to give Vicki the floor to allow her to give some kind of her perspective of where we are and what we're asking for you tonight.
So, Vicki, and again, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I think most of you know me. I am Vicki Tilton, but tonight I'm here in the role of President of the Friends of the BCPA. I want to appeal to you to move ahead with yes votes tonight on this MOU. I cannot begin to give you the history of this endeavor in 3 or 4 minutes. My personal involvement goes back to day one, over 10 years ago. I am only one of many people that had a vision and a passion for what can be, what should be, and what must be to provide culturally diverse opportunities for our citizens to experience the arts, and more importantly, to participate in the arts. That could be dancing, singing, playing an instrument, or becoming a budding thespian. It could also be something in the visual arts. The whole point is to give our citizens, young and old, the opportunity to express themselves and learn to create. Everyone's mind is on budgets right now. I understand that, but it's not just the city of Bloomington, it's everyone. Even our businesses are concerned about these changes at State Farm and how it's going to impact us. Everyone's cutting back or increasing fees and charges. The Friends of the BCPA have been working tirelessly with the city staff, not for days, not months, but years, yes, years, to try to develop a program designed after proven models like our local Miller Park Zoo. These partnerships have proven to be very successful throughout the U.S. This arrangement will save the city money while taking care of a property that has sat dormant for years. The city has a responsibility to take care of this property, and we are willing to help. We, the Friends, are a group of private citizens volunteering our time and talents to support a city-owned facility that desperately needs our attention. None of us serving on the Friends group have any personal agendas. This does not benefit us directly in any way. Our interest is in supporting the arts in our community to make it a better place for all. There are those that will say, we shouldn't be putting any effort or money into this. I say it's foolish. Yes, I believe it's foolish. Even if you choose not to participate in any way by developing your own creativity or going to a play or a concert, the quality of life in this community, the crime rate in our community, the ability to communicate with your neighbors are all affected by the arts. There have been so many times I have been tempted to just step away from this whole thing because of frustration in not seeing progress. There have been distractions and diversions used to ignore our requests for actions on this. But then I hear a voice in my head, a very real voice, saying when we teach people to be creative, they are much less likely to destroy. It's then that I remember why I'm still here, still trying to move this ahead, because it affects everyone in our community. It will give our youth and those that need creative outlets the means to learn and express themselves in positive ways. They will be less likely to destroy. We miss you, Tina Salamone, and we are standing by our commitment to get this job done. Thank you all for listening to me this evening, and I hope that you will vote to put this MOU in place so that we can realize the potential at the BCPA Creativity Center and the positive impact it will have. We can make our community a safer, happier, more productive place by teaching people to express themselves creatively. Thank you.
Jay?
Yep. Thanks, Vicki. So really, I wanted to boil down to what actually is in front of you. What we're asking for you tonight is to formalize the public-private partnership. That is all we're asking for. The development manager that we'll talk about in a little bit is already a budgeted position. There's no new tax dollars coming with this agreement. There's lots of conversations about building partnerships through public-private partnerships. That's what this is. It's a group who wants to support the BCPA as a division. So when we talk about the BCPA, there's the building, there's the division. A lot of times those get confusing. We're really here to talk about the partnership, and we're asking you to approve the partnership so that the Friends group can go out and recruit, fundraise, support what is going on in the Creativity Center and the BCPA, the building. So that is truly what we're asking for tonight. Just a slight background, a little bit of a timeline of the different votes that have happened over the recent years, and with the passing of Tina Salamone, having an interim performing arts manager, then the vote for VenueWorks. That is one of the reasons why this position has been vacant. The development manager has been vacant for so long. It was a position that was budgeted in 2014. It was filled for about 4 months. Then that person followed his wife to a job on the coast, and we lost that position. When Tina Salamone was hired, she believed that she could do performing arts manager, development manager together. And as time went on, we learned that that was not working. So that's when the Friends conversations with me being director really started to grow and get stronger. So I wanted to show those few timelines there. And there's been a lot of confusion about the development manager, that's what's holding this all up. That's what the issue is. The issue is we want you to formalize a public-private partnership between the Friends and the city, much like the zoo and the Zoo Society have built over the years. So this is not a new position. This has been budgeted for years. They will work under the performing arts manager. They will work under Jim. He will establish the goals for this person as well as myself and Eric Veal to make sure that they have high goals to reach. If they're not reaching those goals, we'll look to find someone else. So those are the big things I wanted to hit. I didn't want to spend a lot of time up here. I want to give the council plenty of time to discuss. It does talk in the MOU about operational support, and it's ramped up with $20,000 being in the first fiscal year, fiscal year 2020, so that they have an ability to develop those relationships. You can't just go and somebody you've never met before and ask them for money. You've got to build that. It's called development for a reason. You have to develop those relationships so they can fundraise. And over time, as you can see, they will be paying into the city, into the BCPA, operational support for It's really the whole building, but a lot of times we've talked about it's for the position itself. So it allows them the time to develop their funding and their revenue coming in so that they can pay for this position and support the BCPA from a financial standpoint, in addition to the fundraising piece. So with that, I'm going to open up to any questions you guys may have for
Okay.
Vicki or I.
Just, again, obviously, you had mentioned the point that it's already been a budgeted position. It was held for several months by someone. It's not new, and its main purpose is development and to raise future money.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Beyond that, then, council discussion, we open up for approximately 20 minutes. Alderwoman Painter.
Thank you. I would like to say that I'm supportive of this, and I understand that this has been a long time coming. I agree with the ramping up of the salary for whoever gets hired for this position. My only issue is that our biggest problem right now with our structural deficit is pensions and benefits. So I would like to have added to this MOU that after they hit the $100,000 threshold, that they also become responsible for their own pension and benefit payments as well.
One of the things we talked about earlier is once we get to that $100,000 mark and say the development manager should leave, we'll have those conversations. Maybe at that point they could be hired as a nonprofit employee of the Friends of the BCPA. Right now they don't have the revenue coming in to pay for a person.
Right.
That's the reason we're keeping it the way it's always been.
I understand that, but, to get parity with the way that it is handled with the Zoological Society, that's the way that it's taken care of there, and I would hope that in the future that would be what we could do here. And I would like to see that going forward with a lot of our new hires as well, but anyway, that's my
Okay.
only concern.
Okay. Is that
Thank you.
a proposal for an amendment to the agreement?
Yes.
And if you could restate that as a motion, and we'll see if we have a second. Well, okay, I'm sorry. Right. Okay. So the proposed, you'd like to see an amendment that after 100K,
We start building in their pension and benefit payments.
they start building in their pension benefit payments. Okay, similar to, you're saying the Friends of the Zoo.
Mhm.
Okay. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Just some clarification to follow up on Alderman Painter's comment. On the bottom of page 3 of the MOU, it says, "The Friends agree to pay the city the following amount as a contribution for the salary and benefits paid to the development manager." So I think that there's an intention there, and so what you're suggesting is that that get fleshed out
Right.
and make it very clear that all the benefits then would accrue directly to the Friends.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? I'm not sure what the intention is of the MOU, so maybe you could...
Sure. So what's in here is it's not a salary. It is I just want to make sure I'm stating that very clearly. It's operational support, so it's $20,000 in the first, in 2020. By the time we get to 2024, it's $100,000. Depending on, the person may be making less than that. Their total package may be less than that. It's still, $100,000 would be owed to the city. So their total package, pension, benefits, everything, could still be under $100,000. It's still possible at that point. So
Right.
I think we've got some of that in there.
But I just wanted that to be made clear in the MOU.
Okay. Alderwoman Bray.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the remarks. So just so that I understand the section in regards to this staging, the contribution begins in 2020, and yet we've had some discussion about a $1 million fund that's sitting and waiting for use. Can someone explain or talk to me a little bit about what that fund is slated for, and why can't that fund be immediately tapped to address this particular position?
That money is earmarked for construction in the Creativity Center. So the $1 million that is there will go towards, in fact, we've been in contact with a firm to give us a proposal so we can go forward with doing architecture and engineering for a new HVAC system and a new roof, which are badly needed before you can do much else in that building.
If I
City
could
manager.
add, just for the record, that that money was not city money. Those were monies that were raised, and they were donated money, which is why we've not used it for anything except what they were raised for.
Thank you.
Understood, but now we're getting ready to do something, and I didn't know if when they were raised, were they listed as dedicated funds only for construction, that can't be diverted into,
There is some that is restricted for certain rooms, so we've actually had to pull that out of the roof and HVAC project. But even with that money we have, it's going to be really tight on what we can do in that building with the HVAC and the roof.
I don't want to monopolize the time, but I did have another question about
Go ahead.
about the
You have
term.
the floor. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I appreciate the time you've given me prior to this meeting to talk through some of the questions I had. And one of the things we talked about was this term, a 5-year term versus a 3-year term. And part of that is just about the idea of having some kind of collective memory from the council as we go forward as to what we're trying to accomplish. If we wait 5 years, there's a potential that we'll have a complete turnover on our council, and which could potentially be a turnover of philosophy or ideas. So if we have a touch point that's 3 years in from now, for instance, we know we'll only have one election, and there'll be some people remaining. Does that make sense to those that are sitting? So I'm wondering if a 3-year term, not that it doesn't show confidence, in fact, it shows just a checkpoint to see if we're following this council's philosophy that we set, and then going forward from there for another term. I'll stop there because I'd really like everyone's reaction to a shorter term rather than the 5 years proposed.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Howman?
Thank you. I know I won't be popular here. We're looking at a structural deficit in our, or not, well, not a structural deficit. Steve's done yeoman job, and the department heads have done yeoman job in terms of closing that. We have roads that need to be fixed. We have a pool that needs to be replaced. I mean, where do we draw the line and say we cannot be all things to all people? I like the arts. I like coming to the BCPA. I just have problems with the idea of voting to approve this tonight. I actually thought we were going to have more time to talk about it before it came onto the agenda. I didn't realize we were going to talk about it and vote on it tonight. I mean, there's the Friends shall assist the city in financing capital improvements. What does that mean? Will assist. That's just leaving us open for. I think it leaves it too open for us to continue with this. I mean, I don't. I would like to see us talk about some way of giving the Creativity Center to the Friends, some way of perhaps helping with a fundraiser till they get on their feet. But I can't support another person and potentially additional capital money to be invested in this at this time.
Alderwoman Schmidt. Oh, I'm sorry. Alderwoman Burgess and then Schmidt. Okay.
I actually think Karen is first.
Oh,
Well, I
okay.
know, but I've spoken already, so go ahead.
All right, thank
Okay.
you. I have a couple of questions and I have a couple of comments. So the first question is, if this passes later this evening at our 7 o'clock meeting, what is its impact on the budget?
At this point, none.
All right, so it's a revenue neutral proposal because we're not adding any new positions that don't already exist.
It's already budgeted.
Sorry. Go ahead. You have the floor.
And now I've lost my train of thought. Okay, well, let's get back to something else and try to get back on. In general, and I'm going to go off topic a little bit, but just for informational purposes, because I like to make sure that when our departments do good work, it is recognized. What is the Parks and Rec Department overall cost recovery percentage?
About 60%,
What is the national average?
29%.
Yeah, so you do a phenomenal job at cost recovery, and as far as I can see, this is a continuation of that effort, so that we can make sure that where possible, private money and private donors step in to assist us in our mission as we try to keep our community a wonderful place to live, work, and play. So generally in philosophy, I think that this agreement fits so many of the things we as a city want to accomplish. We want to, where possible, do cost recovery, and you've done an excellent job of doing that. And this will allow us to continue in that because we will have a development director whose job will be to do that, which is, again, an already budgeted position. So it concerns me slightly, and I understand the desire to show that we are making progress, but underfunding community assets is not to our benefit. It does not make the community better. It does not allow us to bring in new residents. It does not allow us to bring in new jobs. So unfortunately, I think the BCPA has been underfunded for a while, and I think it is missing out on opportunities because it hasn't reached its fullest potential. Although I continue, having said that, continue to believe the Creativity Center is something that has to pay for itself. And I've said that before, that I believe that the private fundraising should be sufficient and that there's capacity to do that. So while I'm supportive of further development of the Creativity Center, I am not at this time supportive of spending any public money on it. And that's not the proposal tonight, so no confusion, but I did want to note that. But what concerns me about the conversation this evening is that we have individuals who are supportive of this philosophically, but we're getting a little bit bogged down in the details and looking at the specific language. And it's going to always be a challenge for a document of this kind. We want it to be very specific so we understand exactly what we're going to get. At the same time, we want it to be flexible so it can be a living, breathing document that can be responsive to changing conditions. And where that right line is, where that appropriate or best language is going to depend entirely on who you talk to. So I would simply say, I think we can't nitpick too much. We'll get bogged down in the details. We'll further delay the opportunities that we've been missing. I think that we need to consider this memorandum of understanding as presented, and hopefully it will get a majority support of council later on this evening.
Alderwoman Schmidt.
Thank you. I appreciate the phrase collective memory because I think that's exactly what the failure is now. We started out with a cultural district that was 100% supported with a quarter penny sales tax that's been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away over the years, and you know, consequently we started with a vision that had the funding for it. And now we're at a point where we really need to rely on that public-private partnership. I appreciate what you're saying about 3 years versus 5 years, but I actually would like to see, you know, just an annual coming back to us about where we are with this. I'm very supportive of this. I think we need to do a better job of our collective memory in general about a lot of different agreements that we make, and we sometimes fail at that. We have already seen the value of doing private fundraising. We have close to $1 million already. And I think that this is, in my opinion, this is a promise that we've made for a partnership that has a very good model in the Zoological Society, and we've already seen it in action with Graham Cowger before he left. So I think all the pieces are there for this to succeed. I don't think that it's optional. I appreciate what Vicki Tilton was saying and reminding us about the value of the Creativity Center and the importance of creating in our community. And I think that this is a core part of who we are as a community. So I am not really interested in changing this from 5 to 3 years, but I appreciate the point that you're raising and would hope that we would get regular reports out.
Alderman Black.
Thank you. And collective memory is so good. It's like if this were Pee Wee's show, it would be, our things would be going off. Because that's kind of what I want to touch on as well. So, Jay, just refresh my memory. Where are we at in the Parks Master Plan process?
We actually are meeting with one of the consultants tomorrow as a staff, and we'll be bringing back their recommendations the first meeting in April.
Okay. Thank you. So to that point, this piece is part of that Parks Master Plan at this point in time? Or in the spirit
Not
of?
in the spirit, it'll be in there, but we're really focusing on more of the recreation and the parks, like the individual park side. Like the zoo will only have a small bit of this. Golf is more of a land management piece. It's more about our parks and the facilities, not necessarily the amenities, like the PCPA or the zoo.
Gotcha. All right. Well, just so you know where I'm at on this, I'm very supportive, and if it comes back with an annual or 3-year, I don't really have an opinion about that. I do think we have to be more strategic in how we move some of our pieces on the chessboard when it comes to Parks and Rec, and Lincoln Leisure Center comes to mind as potentially one. Maybe we divest ourselves of that one, and we have more of a honed-in, concentrated cultural district. Because we have to look at both sides of the ledger here, and it just makes sense to me that a development person is going to be bringing in revenue, and that's a no-brainer in my mind. So I guess from here, Alderman Painter's remarks got me thinking about how can we do part of that, like, back-end city cost as part of an agreement. Is this something that you think might hinder or help, or would you need to look back and do some more research on maybe their development component? Like if they hit a certain number, that it's going to be more difficult to raise money because now that triggers a component where it doesn't actually go to the organization per se. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I think. I think there is some. I'd have to see how it'd look on paper in terms of how we would phrase that. If it would be, at year 2024, which is the first 100,000 year mark, because they'd already be giving 100,000, which probably is going to be more than their compensation and benefits.
Right.
But if their cost and benefit package is above that, then they have to pay the difference. And obviously, this would have to be the Friends group would have to agree to this since it's a partnership, right?
Right.
I think that's how I would think it'd have to be stated, but I'll let other city staff weigh in on that one as well.
We don't have the
I think
verbiage in writing.
that's first blush, that's kind of how I would probably phrase it, something like that.
Because I don't want to overcomplicate this and try to micromanage the person through policy. I mean, I think at a high level, my role in this situation from my perspective is just, do we support this? And I would say that I do. And detailing out some of the specifics, I'm not really interested in doing, but it does raise a interesting question.
And if I could just clarify, Alderwoman Schmidt, you weren't necessarily suggesting we amend the agreement, it's just on an annual basis we would ask them to come back to us?
I was asking for a regular reporting out and not to have it renewed every year, no. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that, because at least my experience has been, as mayor, is anytime we've asked the cultural district or anybody from the BCPA for information or to come to the council meeting, we've never had any issues with them coming and wanting to make their case. So let's see, Alderman Miller-Wamboy.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. So I was looking at how much the Friends of the BCPA have to repay annually, and as I calculated, after 5 years, so it's a total of about $200,000, right?
It's $100,000.
300.
You mean total?
Yeah, that's right. 300. Sorry. Yeah. 300. Can you believe I was a math major? It's been a while. So, and what's the average salary for a fundraiser?
I think in the budget we're around 65.
65. And does that include benefits?
That's just salary.
Just salary. Okay. If you included benefits, how much is that approximately?
I'm sorry?
If you included benefits, how much would you approximate?
I would guess we'd probably be, about 90.
90. Okay.
That should be, that's on the high side, I would think.
Okay. And with let's say year 6, year 7, you would renegotiate, but we can assume that it will be at least $100,000 that you would ask them to pay.
I think it'd be fair to say if they're a city employee who will get evaluations, if they're doing a great job, which means they're bringing in more money, their opportunity for better scores on their evaluation,
right.
which is part of the raise.
But I'm saying in terms of how much you would ask the Friends of the BCPA to pay in year 6, 7 as you renegotiate agreements?
As this sits right now, it's $100,000 per year after 2024.
After 2024, okay, all right, okay. Okay, sounds good, that's what I wanted to know, thank you.
Other
Mayor, I
comments?
have something whenever
Yes.
Chuck comes around.
Alderman Matthew, thank you.
One thing I just wanted to add, I don't want to restate what everybody else has said. I mostly agree down the line with everything that Karen said. One thing I just wanted to add, though, is we currently have a list of performing groups and nonprofits in and of themselves and individuals who already have expressed interest that they want to rent space in the facility once we get through this process of making sure it's safe and up to par and ready to go for everybody. We have a list of people who are ready and willing to step in. And so for future operational costs, once we get through this capital part of it, those groups have already made verbal commitments to us and to the Friends that they're willing to step in and pay rent in those areas to help cover, that janitorial cost and things of that nature as well. So without restating everything else, I'm very supportive of this. I just want to make sure we talked about that there is a vision for how this building operates after we get through the capital campaign. Thank you.
Okay. And it was hinted at a couple times, but I do want to make clear that there are always, for major projects, economic development benefits over and above any kind of cultural, and I think Vicki did an outstanding job of talking about some of the social benefits to the community. But the arts are a big business, too. So even just keeping that in mind as well. Alderwoman Bray.
So I had a question about, and I think some of these questions relate to our philosophy. And of course, when we talk about honing in our philosophy, then it does find itself distilled into the language of the contract. So I don't think we're nitpicking when we ask important questions to figure out what our term is or whether or not we'll continue to hire someone or whether or not they'll become an employee of the 501c. So with that said, I have a question about Roman numeral number 10, termination, and the intention there about termination. I'm looking at the provision about any funds raised for BCPA facilities shall be turned over to City Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts Department. Is the intention of this provision that the accounts will all be turned over, or will there be a parsing of amounts, that things that were simply for facilities are turned over and some other amounts retained? Just asking what the intention is there.
My answer for that, Alderman Bray, would be that in this case it's funds, so the funds raised would go to the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts. Mm-hmm. If the Friends disbanded or.
So is it the intention then that the financial records that are set out on page 6 under Roman numeral number 6, that they will be kept separately from any other, I guess, 501c records and the like, that those accounts will be separately maintained? And
Yes, they're their own organization.
okay, so then if we look at then Roman numeral number 10, the termination, I'm thinking maybe just for clarity to make sure that the words match everyone's intentions, that maybe we just say that those accounts are turned over, and that way there's never a dispute about what somebody wrote their check for, right? If it went in the account, then it gets turned over, if that's the intention. That would be a thought about possibly an amendment, just to make sure everybody understands what our philosophy is and what we intend here. That would be a thought. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay. And just in terms of, a couple people have mentioned priority-based budgeting. In terms of our priorities, clearly, 911 service, public safety, police, our streets, infrastructure, economic development are important. This is, I think, a subset of economic development, but this is a public-private partnership. And the amount of money that we allocate, as Alderwoman Bray had excuse me, not Alderwoman Ray, Alderwoman Burgess had revealed in asking you the question, if the average Parks and Rec department gets 29% and we get 60% back, we're doing a darn good job. This may very well help us even more. But I also note that this is still at the bottom of our priority list in some ways. I'm sorry, Jay, but we keep coming back at you. We do not have friends of the sewers, right? We do not have friends of paramedics. We fund those things. Here we're looking for a broader range of things. So there are some things that we know we fund, and we know we fund completely, and there are some things that we know that we are going to be partners in because they're not as high a priority in our budgetary process at a time of a budgetary crunch. Now, there may be a time where we need friends of the sewers, but we're not quite there yet. Anyway, thank you very much. Any other? Alderwoman Schmidt.
I just need a little clarification from Kim. It says any funds raised. What's the difference between that and saying accounts? What's the actual pragmatic impact of that?
Right, so should there be a time where funds are raised and, let's say folks say that the funds were given, not that this would happen, but we just want to make sure that there's not an opportunity here for disagreement or dissension, if we can all come to agreement at this juncture, that there could be a pile of money and there would be a belief by some that only some of that money was for BCPA facilities, that some of it was for some other operation, some study of other creativity initiatives or the like, just making sure that it's clean and it's understood that everything that's in the 501c account gets turned over. It's just, we don't need an argument about, I don't think either side wants to argue about how much of those funds are properly part of the BCPA facilities as defined, and we've defined the facilities as not only the Creativity Center, but also the BCPA and the Lincoln Park, which is the grassy area in front.
So it doesn't override the wishes of the donor.
Well, again, what goes in that fund is supposed to be everything that people have donated for this particular project, right? So just later, we don't have disagreements about how much is left back for some other purpose. Everything that's in that account gets turned over. It just seems to me to be a cleaner way to express it, perhaps.
But I guess I still have that question though. Suppose somebody gives $100,000 and it's for something very specific. Is changing the language to what you're suggesting take away the intent of the donor for that money?
It would not, because the donor's intent then would be carried out. If they gave money for the BCAP facilities and its operations, and the money would then go into that 501c account, and then the whole account is turned over to the city should this terminate. And there's no debate about whether or not that donor's money would go over to the zoo or something, because the money has already been earmarked for the BCPA facilities, right? So it's not, it's cleaner, in my view. It's a cleaner way to express that provision.
I'm not quite getting the difference, but I will go with what you're saying.
Jeff, did you want to weigh in on that? Do you understand the distinction, or is there any clarification you can help provide for those of us who are trying to understand this?
No, the only thing I think I would add to that is, and I think I also understand where Alderman Bray is coming from, is again, just to clarify that essentially any monies that go in here, there's no question at the end of the day that those are monies that are coming over to the city and that are not going to some other organization or some other event or something like that. So perhaps a little bit of a tweaking of the language, maybe BCPA facilities as to, constrictive there or something like that. If there was some other type of a fundraising or whatever, that we could go back and we could look at that. And again, I'm not sure what the precise intent was. I wasn't involved in the drafting of this, but that's something we could certainly go back and discuss.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Because I've heard intent is to do exactly as you've discussed, and so let's just make sure that's the clearest expression of our intent, because it's unpleasant when there's disagreements of that nature down the road, and we can head them off. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
Mayor?
Jamie, yeah.
So I understand, Kim, I understand where you're going, or you're coming from with this. My only thing is I just would say we need to be very careful that we don't jeopardize the organization's 501c3 status by placing encumbrances on them. You know, we need to make sure that they can still stay as an independent organization and maintain that nonprofit and, importantly, tax-deductible status. And so there's a balance that we have to strike there. I see where you're coming from, but I just want to make sure we don't jeopardize their actually ability to fundraise by putting burdens on them.
Okay.
So I would just leave it at that thought as well.
You look somewhat puzzled, Mr. Jurgens.
No, we just have to go back and I think talk about that, look at that provision a little bit more. The council wants us to.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. At this point, thank you very much, Jay, and thank you very much, Council, and thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. At this point, we're going to move on to a presentation on the Community Development Rental Inspection Program. We have approximately 10 minutes and approximately a 20-minute council discussion. And
Mayor, if I could introduce this just by
Please.
making two notes to it. One, I did want to thank John Capodice from the Property Maintenance Review Board for being in attendance because they've offered their good offices for anything they may be able to help in this. And secondly, as Bob Mark goes into the rental inspection program, we also will necessarily end up talking about the administrative court, which does play a part in that. And so Jeff then may want to give you a quick rundown on how that works as well. And at that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Mart.
Yeah, thank you all. Well, I think some of the recent media related to an apartment fire, on a 12-unit apartment fire, kind of brought to light the need for city staff to bring forward a discussion on our rental property inspection program. The rental property inspection program is outlined within our Chapter 45 of the Municipal Code, and within the purpose of the rental property inspection program is to maintain the city's rental housing stock by enforcement of property maintenance, life safety and health codes, applicable codes, through periodic building inspections and annual registration. I think from a staff standpoint, we see that as our working definition is to ensure clean, safe, and decent rental housing for all residents within the community. Just a quick program overview. The rental inspection program was adopted in 2003. It applies to non-owner occupied rental apartments, duplexes, condominiums, and single-family dwellings. There are approximately 12,000 residential rental units within the program. There was some discussion as to the standards that the city applies or city staff applies towards that. We do follow the 2012 International Code Council Property Maintenance Code. It's recognized throughout the United States and internationally. The development community is well aware of these codes, as are the judges that you might have to take an enforcement effort up to as well. So that we do have a standard in place that our code enforcement officers are responsible for. The program currently includes 2 rental inspectors assigned to the program. The intent is to achieve a 3-year cycle for on-site inspections, and we're pretty close to that intent. Registration fees are $65 for 1 and 2 family dwellings and $5 for each additional unit. And missed inspection fee, if you're wanting to know that, is $100. So kind of going through the process, this is kind of a slide you got to kind of look through as we go through it. But basically, the rental property owner does have to submit participate in the annual registration within the program. So then we would conduct a periodic inspection of the property. And I guess I kind of need to explain the process that we're going through there. So when the rental property comes up in the queue for inspection, the inspector needs to notify the property owner that the inspection is pending, and the property owner then has to have tenant releases and the property owner releases. So there's a little bit of lag between the notification that an inspection is necessary and the time that an inspection is actually scheduled. So after the inspection, you either receive, this program is a pass-fail. It used to be on a grading system, as I understand it, but now we're on a pass-fail system. So if you pass, you immediately get your certificate of inspection, you're on your way, and you're able to maintain your rental property until the next inspection. But if you fail the inspection, you will receive a notice of violation letter. It's a very thorough letter outlining all the code violations that are attributed to the dwelling unit. That could range anywhere from a smoke detector to a broken cabinet door, a vent in the bathroom. So those are just kind of the range that you might see in a residential unit. After the notice of inspection, what you'll see there is that we're defining like a timeline for compliance. So typically, you're going to get a 1 month for your reinspection to complete all those items that are listed within the letter. When we come back for the reinspection, the intent is that we're just going to come in and check off everything that's been done. A lot of times that does not occur. But if the program is set up that we're working towards compliance with our residential rental property owners, that's been the long-term directive from the city administration, is to work towards compliance. So what you might find is that we'll if there are no life safety issues associated with the rental reinspection, then we may extend out a reinspection schedule as well. But if there's also a point when if they do not pass that rental inspection on a second or third time because they're not working towards compliance, then we could go down the enforcement route. And under the enforcement route, we have the ability to administer fines, take legal action in a higher level than the administrative court that we already have in place, or we can actually revoke the certificate of inspection from the property owner and essentially have them vacate the premises. Going through the process, the intent is once we go through the administrative court, and Jeff will kind of explain the process that's associated with the administrative court, we're going to be doing periodic re-inspections to verify compliance with the court's orders. You shall have a timeline for compliance. Let's move forward on hitting these major items. We'll come back in. We'll send that inspector out again to see that they're working towards compliance. The majority of the time, they are working. These property owners are working towards compliance. They'll go right to the pass mode, and then we're into the certificate of inspection, and they're on their way again. But for whatever reason, if they can't seem to get out of that complete the task, then they are stuck in the administrative court, and then we can take it up to the next level, and that's something that Jeff will kind of explain to you all. I think the one thing that you have to realize is that, and this is something that Jeff can discuss, is that the intent is that we're working towards compliance again. And once we go through this process of enforcement and reinspection and passing, oftentimes we will waive the fines, but that person is still responsible for the administrative court costs. So that's one thing that you should be aware of about how we're trying to work towards compliance on these issues with the landlords. So I'd like to probably just go through a simple, if I can slow my finger down, just kind of, this is an example of what try to capture one picture that might show 2 or 3 different items. I'm told that this would be generally a C, kind of an average rental. What you're seeing here is behind the TV when the desk was moved, you'd have a broken out wall. That's under the Property Maintenance Code, Section 3053. That would require the landlord to repair that failing drywall and the paint. What you'll see down below that is a faceplate on an electrical outlet. That is under the Property Maintenance Code 605 electrical, so that would require a new faceplate to be installed. You'll see on the heater system there are some damaged fins that limit its ability to function properly, and also that the cover would be off of that heating source there, the radiant heat. And then in the corner you'll see an accumulation of mold, and that's a property maintenance code violation under 3053 for interior spaces. So that landlord would be responsible for remediating that. So when you look at a picture like this, it looks overwhelming, it looks bad. It is repairable. And this may or may not, this is not something that staff would say, we want to displace the tenant for something that can be addressed in a short order. I would say that the landlord is responsible for some of these items, and the tenant is responsible for some of these items. I don't think a landlord would typically cause damage to their own property and not address that. That might be something that somebody got a little rambunctious in a room or whatever that might be, but nonetheless, it's something that has to be repaired. But in this case, we would not ask for the property or the tenant to be displaced. So this is kind of some examples of what staff routinely addresses in their property rental inspections. And again, we do use the International Property Maintenance Code as our standard for enforcement. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions of Mr. Mark?
Maybe Jeff could address the...
Oh, Jeff, yes, please. And then we may preempt a couple questions then. Excuse me.
Thank you, Director Mart.
Thanks, Jeff.
Just to touch briefly on the administrative court process, and that's headed up by the Deputy Corporation Counsel, Angela Fian. She was not able to be here tonight, so unfortunately you have me in her stead. But she wanted me to kind of echo some of the things that Director Mart talked about in terms of our goal has been compliance. Perhaps people have said maybe that's been overly, we've overly focused on that. At the beginning of this year, we actually started implementing more court costs. It used to be, well, it still is, before you get to administrative court, you've had a couple of different times through the inspectors to get issues like that rectified. So if they have not, if they've had ample opportunity to get that fixed, they haven't got it fixed, then the inspector is going to refer it over to administrative court. It used to be that as long as they would still get that fixed once it was to administrative court, we would not even charge them the administrative court costs. We have stopped that practice as of the first of the year. We implemented the fact that if we get to the point of us having to create a file, us having to, pay a hearing officer because you had opportunity to fix it and you did not, we are going to charge you court costs. So we have started that process, and that's $110 per each case. The next question becomes, okay, well, they have, you saw maybe 4 or 5 violations up there, and they're taking time to kind of get some of those remedied, and maybe they've racked up hundreds or thousands of dollars in potential fines, but at the end of the day, they get those remedied and fixed. Are we going to fine them, or are we just really working towards compliance here? We have looked at, and we've started talking about some different options, maybe amending our ordinance on chronic offenders. So if there's somebody that's got more than one violation within a 12-month period at a property, maybe we won't just waive all of those fees. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more discretion. So if you've got so many violations and, you're really taking too much time, that, maybe we're not going to try and charge you $15,000, but maybe we're going to charge you $1,000. So there is some movement we can make within the administrative court to perhaps, start imposing a few more fines. And that's something that we can explore. And like I said, we've talked about different ways to do that. And we can bring back an ordinance to that effect and maybe start doing some of those even without an ordinance in effect. But one of, I think, the policy questions that we want to talk to the council about is, what is your appetite? And, again, do you want us to be focused mostly on compliance, or is there some appetite to begin, being perhaps a little bit more aggressive with the fines? Not 15,000, but, maybe 1,000, 1,500, that type of a thing. And I think
And you mean fines for, just to clarify, for the worst offenders?
Yeah, for the offenders
Chronic offenders.
that are not getting the remedies in time, or they're really dragging things out, multiple court appearances, those types of things. We think that, perhaps if some of these property owners start seeing that, the fines aren't going to go away at the end of the day, that there might be some financial consequence, maybe that will help increase compliance. The other thing that Angela said that she's done that's been fairly successful is trying to get plea agreements at the beginning of these cases, to where if they've got a certain deadline to get these code violations remedied, and if they don't, then there's an agreed upon fine. And so we've been working in administrative court to get more of those plea-type agreements, and that's one way to kind of have the best of both worlds. They know that there's a drop-dead date that they have to have these repairs fixed, and if they don't, then there's going to be fines and additional fines that they're going to have to pay. We've never looked at this as a moneymaker. We've really looked at this as a program to try and clean up the properties, get everybody in compliance, and again, so that's why, you know, we're here to kind of continue some of these discussions and see what the thoughts of the council are.
Alderwoman Burgess.
Thank you, Jeff. And this is an area where it's been very interesting to watch the evolution of this program, because we dealt with this back in, I think it was 2015, when we raised the inspection fee in order to fund that second inspector. And at that point in time, we couldn't even wrap our heads around what the issues were, because the inspections were so far behind. So it's very encouraging to hear that adding that inspector has allowed us to get closer to meeting our goal, and it sounds like we will be able to get there once we get through the full backlog and maybe take care of some of these problems. So that's very encouraging. Anecdotally, I can tell you that after we added another inspector, things have gotten substantially better, at least in my ward. I see properties being fixed up. I see the evidence of that code enforcement happening. So where we run into the issues then, and I think this is why this presentation to me has been very, very helpful in looking at this information so that any action we take can be very targeted. Because, and I think that Mr. Mart mentioned this, the vast majority of our landlords really do want to comply. And when these issues are brought to their attention, that's what they do. And we don't hear about them because they fix the issue and we move on. But the real problem we're running into is we now have some smaller number, a minority of landlords who are non-compliant, and they're chronically non-compliant. And there, I think, as a city, our patience needs to run very thin and cannot be infinite, because we have individuals in our community who are living in substandard conditions, and that's just not acceptable. And so I would personally suggest that when it comes to those chronic non-compliant offenders, it's probably time at this point in time to say we need to be increasing those fines over time, because there's been enough time now to see how the additional inspections have worked out. There's been enough time to see what does and doesn't work in the administrative court, and we haven't gotten to that full compliance. So, but thank you so much, and thank you to Jeff and your department for the administrative court. That's been a really useful tool in the city. And Bob, thank you, because your inspectors do an incredible job and are very thorough and conscientious and care a great deal about making sure our residents have safe property.
Alderman Sage and Schmidt.
Thank you, Jeff and Bob. And so Jeff, the kind of feedback you were looking for that Amelia just shares, that kind of the level of feedback you're looking for.
If that's kind of a consensus, that'll give us some clear direction on where.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Amelia makes good points, right? I mean, I think we ought to incentivize good landlords, right? And deal fairly directly with those chronically, habitual offenders, right? I mean, I think that's good. And Bob, I want to make sure I understand, as we revisit and update the program, we're not talking about adding additional staffing at this time, right?
That is not, it is, I don't believe it's necessary.
Okay. And did I understand, because we heard some remarks during public comment about the approach that we take now is a kind of a scheduled 3-year, a triannual inspection every 3 years, but there still appears to be some sense that property owners, landlords think that once they passed, they really don't need to be inspected again until there's a complaint lodged. So, it sounds like maybe there's a little bit of a communication gap there. I don't know. But perhaps on a little larger, a little higher level, do we have some kind of process in place? And I'm sure we do, whether it's probably informal or maybe formal, that we make sure that the landlords feel like they're being heard by city staff. I know Mr. Capodice mentioned, kind of brainstormed a little bit in some of his public comments about some things that we might do to perhaps offer that feedback or that sense to the landlords that they're being heard and so forth.
The Property Maintenance Review Board had been in place for many years, and some of their role had slightly changed upon the adoption of the Administrative Hearing Court.
Okay.
But their primary role is to hear appeals of administrative decisions of the staff. So if we misinterpret the code, their primary role is to make that interpretation for the staff members. And that's something that would still be supported through our legal department. But we've had, trying to maintain a standard of quarterly meetings, we just keep missing this opportunity to get a quorum. We recently had an appointment to the Property Maintenance Board, Robert Garcia, I believe. And so we're starting to get enough membership in there where we can have active dialogue towards improving that system.
And then finally, Bob, I just want to say I appreciate the fact I was somewhat prepared for another Jim Karch type video as part of this presentation, and I appreciate that wasn't there. I find myself still haunted by that video, as a matter of fact. So I appreciate your presentation, so thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schmidt and Black.
Thanks a lot there, Alderman Sitch. First of all, I want to share as well that I've heard many good things about the rental inspectors and the way that they approach the work, and very professional and lots of good detail. And I also appreciate Alderman Burgess's summary of this. That's pretty much where I am on this. One question that I have, just to line up the concept that we would really be more aggressive in the administrative court. Had we been more aggressive in some ways, would we have had the situation that we now have with various properties with one or two of our landlords? Is this actually the remedy that you think is the next?
Let me answer that in a couple different ways, and then I'll give you an opportunity to answer that. Because I asked Angela this afternoon if, were we aggressive enough? Would there have been something you would have done different? And she said, when this was brought to her, she recommended a couple of different courses of action. One, they actually filed a demolition case in circuit court because of how bad the rental was. And then she recommended also a case be filed in administrative court. So we actually pursued this from the city in two different avenues. And the demolition case is still pending. That was filed in December, and I think there may be a case management in June or something like that. The administrative court case was filed in January and heard in February. So, and of course there were a number of violations that were cited and other things. So, from the standpoint of, as I think, Bob talked a little bit about earlier, if it's just a faceplane on an electrical outlet or something like that, obviously those types of issues are not as concerning as when you get into the health and safety issues. And I don't want to speak for Bob, but obviously I think his department, legal department, certainly takes those issues very seriously. I've been involved in situations, where we have had health and safety issues where we've, closed people down and that type of thing. And so it's just kind of a different atmosphere, but I'll let you.
I might just add that, we talk about this 3-year cycle, and before it was a wider cycle of life. But if we are receiving a number of complaints specific to a property, there's a provision in our code that allows the director to initiate a reinspection of that property regardless of this 3-year intent. So we would move that up on the schedule to address those issues if we're getting those complaints. In relationship to this apartment on Gettysburg, we were not receiving a plethora of complaints specifically related to that within the last year. So that wouldn't have rose to the thing. It was just in this regular cycle of inspections. And again, you're talking about a 12-plex. There is a large number of violations there, but we're talking about a 12-unit dwelling there.
And Section 8, I believe, is annually inspected.
I'm not familiar with that. I believe we do that.
I believe that's
right.
true. Could I also ask, are we still aggressively following nuisance abatement in partnership with the police department? Okay. Good to know.
Alderman Black, and then we may need to move on.
Thank you. And if you don't mind pulling up the slide with the bad apartment that was nearly haunting Alderman Sage. So, I know.
That's a C.
Yeah.
That's a C.
I don't want to live there.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little lower. I was thinking CD, but talking with the inspector, they're like, well, you see that quite a bit.
Yeah. You do, and you know, it almost reminds me a little bit of one of my college apartments. That's where I learned how to patch drywall, getting a little raucous. Uh, After I moved out, of course, I came in, yes, no problem. So, everything that I've heard so far, I agree with, but I kind of want to dig in just a little bit deeper on a point here, and maybe this is where we engage the Property Maintenance Review Board. And I think a lot of the challenge that I'm hearing, in Ward 7 at least, it's the same properties, the same property owners that I continue to hear. And it's the question is, why won't you do anything? And you know, this isn't talking a loose cabinet, or we're not talking about, you know, a faceplate off of an electrical outlet. I mean, it's stuff like this or worse. And I know that one of the challenges that we face, and GLT did a story about it, is affordable housing, and then tenants who are either afraid because they don't want retribution from their landlord, or they have nowhere to go. And perhaps a task for the Property Maintenance Review Board would be, what are some options for some of these tenants in a situation in which we have to go in there because of the life safety and shut them down? Because I think it's not computing to me that 800 and some odd violations is somehow not, you're done. But then you have to deal with the reality of moving 30 folks out of there and finding housing for them, that their kids can get to school, they can get to school, et cetera. So at least a takeaway for me that I think would be interested, that'd be a great task for the Property Maintenance Review Board, because you have...
That's not, they're not, that's the way I understand it, that's not their function.
They still can meet on various...
And I guess my proposal would be that they're looking for topics to discuss, and I would love to get their insight, because that's a natural thing that we already have landlords and tenants together. We have to hear both sides of it, and I try to get away from this good-bad dichotomy of landlords, but I know that it's the same ones I hear again and again and again, and maybe a recommendation comes back of, here's how we can handle some of these challenges, because at what point in time can the city just say, you're done, we're taking this property? Because we have such horrible conditions, either just from the street or this or worse. And those are the questions that I'd like to see asked. And I can't help but think that we need to be doing a better job of educating our tenants, and it's very difficult, I know, of their rights, who to call, things that they can do to make sure that their concerns will be addressed in a fair manner. And I think that would be a great takeaway for that board to at least review, and maybe, I don't need it tomorrow, but at some point down the road, look at that and have a public discussion about it.
And, you know, we already have a draft of the chronic offender language that we're looking at adding to the code. So, I mean, that might be something that we work with community development. Maybe we get, you know, in front of this board, have some of those conversations. You know, it goes beyond just kind of the penalties as you're talking about. But I certainly, from my perspective, I don't think the legal department would have any issue, obviously, working with that board and getting some of their input and feedback before we bring back another proposal to the council.
Maybe it's as easy as, you know, showing pictures of some of these failed properties that are continual habitual offenders, and we just put them up before a public meeting, and let's let people know what's going on, because there seems to be, we're shining a light at it because something has happened, but this issue has been going on for many years.
Oh, yeah, they've been fighting it for a long time.
And we do need to move on, but
Just
last but
really
not
quickly,
least.
and I know this is kind of similar to what Scott is alluding to, but do we have a rating system that people can see publicly about, you know?
It's on the web, yeah.
It's on the web, okay.
Pass,
All right.
fail.
Okay.
But we don't have the A, B, C,
But it's on the web.
Well, it's essentially a pass-fail.
Right.
It used to be a rating system of a grades prior to my arrival, but we know...
But not just for the properties, but for the landlords themselves.
I'm not sure, like on a specific code violation?
Right.
What's the
It's
standard?
the by address.
By address, okay, all right.
Okay, all right.
I misunderstood, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you both very much. Appreciate it. Okay, at this point, we move on to our last discussion item of the evening in special session, and that is discussion and direction by HR Gov USA regarding next steps for the recruitment of the permanent city manager. And we have a presentation by Nicole Albertson for a few minutes, and then council discussion. Thank you.
Actually, I'm just going to tee it up for Joe Ellen and introduce to you Joe Ellen Earl from GovHR USA. As she's starting to talk to you, I'm going to hand out one other item that we want to discuss with you this evening. So I'll turn it over to Joe Ellen.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Joellen.
Thank you. Good to see you all again. Hello. I got an opportunity to speak with most of you today, so thank you for that. And if I did not, I'm still happy to do that, either over the phone or an email with the questionnaire. But again, thank you for your time today. And what is being passed out is a copy of the recruitment schedule. Do you have one more copy? Yes, I do. I don't have my copy. Thank you. So this is proposed, and what I discussed with you today is worked into this schedule. So this has all the milestones for the recruitment, and I wanted to get your feedback. And we don't have to decide on actual days today or anything like that, but this is more about here's the process and what you would like to see in the process. And then I can work with Nicole and get information back to you and get it finalized. So obviously today I was here meeting with all of you and talking about the process. I will go back to my office. I will write up a recruitment profile for you and send it back to Nicole to have you read it and give any other comments that you have. It will be the text of the profile. Once you agree with the text and give me any edits you have, we'll put it into the final format with all of the pictures that the city will provide or has provided to me, and then we'll be ready to advertise. I will send that back with the list of advertising locations that I'm recommending for your feedback as well. But I will tell you that I will recommend that you cast a wide net. You advertise nationally through ICMA, through the Illinois managers, as well as some surrounding states. There's also the National Forum for Black Public Administrators and the Local Government Hispanic Network. So I'll give you that whole list, and then you can let me know if you're okay with it. So looking at the schedule, we should be ready to do that the week of March 26th. So I'll turn the profile around to you, give you about a week, 5 days or so to read it and get me the comments. I'll make the final edits and we'll advertise. So after that, we need some time for me to reach out to people that I think might potentially be interested in the position, as well as give people an opportunity to apply. So it's about 4 weeks that we'll have it out there and seeking applicants. That would bring us to April 23rd. And then after that, I start the vetting process with the candidates. And I think Heidi probably talked a little bit about this with you when she was here at your last meeting, but it requires Skype interviews and just really drilling into the background of the individuals. Another thing that I could do, if you would like me to, is pose some questions to the candidates to give some written feedback about, and I could have that available for you when you actually decide on who you want to interview. And I can put some of those together and send them to you if you'd like. There were a couple of themes I heard today about, well, I won't get into it, but there's a couple of themes I heard today, and then I want to get the rest of the feedback, and I can pose some questions for you, and then what that allows you to do is give the candidates an opportunity to reflect upon some of the issues that you've raised for the city and actually give you some feedback that they've thought about in written format so you can see what their style is and what their thought process is. So I always find that to be very helpful because when I'm making a recommendation on who you would interview, you're going to get the cover letter and you're going to get the resume. And having some more information I think is good to help you look at the whole person. So I'll provide that to you as well. My goal would be to bring back 8 to 12 candidates. I have no idea how many we'll get, but that's what I try to do. And my recommendation here is to meet around the week of May 14th. So we would just have to figure out a time. We would do that in closed session because you're not going to know who you want to interview at that point. So we want to keep the confidentiality of the candidates because if you choose not to interview some of the people I present, then they're done and we preserve their confidentiality. Then we would go to the first interviews where, and I guess my question would be, and we can refine this, and again, I'll work with Nicole on this, but depending on how many candidates you have, you may want to have an initial interview with semifinalists and then bring them down to a few finalists, maybe 3 to 4 finalists, and then bring them back and go through a more robust process with community panels, maybe a meet and greet or a community forum, something to that effect. So when I spoke with your staff this morning and then somebody emailed something that's going on in Urbana with their city administrator finalists, there's several things that you can do to make sure that you have a process that you're including the public. So we just need to find out exactly what that will entail. I know in the past you've had community stakeholder panel, you have department head panels, obviously you would interview. So I can sketch that out for you and kind of give you what the time frame would be, and then you can let me know if you're comfortable with that. So if you do a two-step process where you do your initial group and then you narrow them down and invite them back, we're looking at that second time frame being around the week of June 4th. I was mindful of Memorial Day, so I thought if you were able to have your first interviews the week of the 21st of May, then you could announce your candidates the next week, right around Memorial Day, so people would know who they are, give a bio about them, and then do the final interviews the week of June 4th. And if you stuck to the schedule, depending on who your candidate is, you would be able to have the person start, pretty soon, or, sometime 30 to 60 days after that.
Questions, comments? Alderwoman Schmidt.
Thanks very much. I know that you've talked with most of us about what we're looking for, so I'm interested in knowing where you gather information from to help sell this community to candidates. I mean, obviously they're going to do all their due diligence with media and whatever, but how do you reach out to the chamber? How do you describe our community to help pique interest in the position?
So part of what we talked about today were some opportunities, so I will highlight those in very specific things, like we talked about the schools. The schools are good. There's lots of things. You have a lot of amenities in the community, and the profile will be structured where it will start with some of the background about the community, some of the amenities of the community, the form of government. So it will highlight all of that. Sometimes I get information from the chamber. It just depends what's out there. A lot of it I'll get online. Sometimes I'll get some of it from the city's website. I'll put in some demographic information just to paint a full picture of the community, and then what follows is the job itself and what the requirements are, and then the characteristics and traits, what we talked about today, and the opportunities and challenges. So the bulk of the profile is about the community. So if there were any sources that you would want to make sure that I checked to get good background information, please let me know that. Any of you all have my email, or you can let Nicole know, and I'd be happy to look at that and make sure that I highlight that in the profile as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any concerns about the timetable? Okay, Alderman Black.
I would just advocate for as quickly as possible. The sooner we get it posted, the sooner we bring it down, the sooner we can get going. We don't have time for a lengthy process. We got a lot of things going on right now.
And I will tell you that I'm a stickler for an agenda here, a time frame. So that's why I'll work with Nicole. We'll get your dates so everybody has enough, advanced planning. And then when I work with the candidates, I say this is when things are going to happen. So knowing things early on, everybody has time to plan. We're 2 months away or so of when you'd actually have to interview, and then we can stick to this. Barring anything unforeseen, we should be able to stick to this.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. At this point, we are ahead of schedule. And is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderman Black, second by Alderwoman Schmidt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Adjourned for about 19 minutes. Thank you.